Anti-government protests continue in Israel as public anger mounted over Netanyahu's handling of the pandemic. Protesters took to the streets in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, calling for his resignation. Police were seen using water cannons to disperse demonstrators who gathered in front of Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem. Hit by high unemployment and the rising COVID-19 cases, Israelis have taken to the streets almost daily for the last 2 weeks. The protests came as Israel is now imposing renewed restrictions to quell a second wave. Israel has been recording more than 1,000 new coronavirus infections every day in recent weeks. Prime Minister Netanyahu even admitted that he reopened the economy too soon. In a bid to control public anger, Netanyahu has announced plans to send cash to all Israelis. Now, this measure has been slammed by experts who believe that Israel's economy needed targeted assistance and not a nationwide payout. While some protesters voiced frustration over the renewed lockdown, others have blasted the government for failing to improve testing capacity ahead of the second wave. And Netanyahu's ratings have also taken hit over his handling of this crisis. According to a poll by an Israeli think tank, only 29.5% of the public support Netanyahu's coronavirus management. Now, this is a record drop from his approval rating of 57.5% at the beginning of April. Public anger has also been compounded by corruption charges filed against Netanyahu. The Prime Minister went on trial in May for bribery, fraud and breach of trust charges, which he denies. The corruption trial resumes in Jerusalem today, although Netanyahu is not expected to appear in court. Now, we are being joined by international affairs expert Jody Cohen from Ranana. Good evening to you, Jody. Thanks for being with us. Why have the Israelis taken to the streets against Netanyahu? Is it the way that he has handled the COVID-19 pandemic response, or is it the charges against him? Help us to understand the context behind all of this public anger.
This is a very difficult time in Israel, as it is across the world. You've seen the demonstrators in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, the political and economic capital of Israel. And really, they've been protesting two issues. In Jerusalem, the protests have largely centered on the corruption trial. And these are nothing new. These are protests that we've seen, political protests throughout the three elections that we've had over the past year in Israel. So this is a continuation of those. And then the protests in Tel Aviv, which started out trying to be apolitical. And really, these were protests at the economic consequences of the virus and expressing dissatisfaction amongst those present with the handling of the virus. And as you said, there have been various polls over the last couple of months. We've gone from, in the start of May, 74% of people polled by Channel 12 said that they were satisfied with the handling of the government with the coronavirus. And then as recently as last week, in a Channel 13 poll, 60% of people said that they were dissatisfied with the handling. I think there's a lot of disappointment because Israel was handling the first virus, the first wave. It seemed to be handling it very well. And it got down to a stage where there were 12 new cases being reported daily. And then the restrictions were eased. And as you said, Netanyahu has now said that he believes they were eased too quickly, despite him repeatedly going on television and asking people to remember to keep a social distance and to wear their masks. I mean, when I was out on the street, when the restrictions were first eased, this was really not the case. Then the government introduced, they doubled the fine for people not wearing masks. And slowly you did start to see more and more people wear masks on the street. But the numbers went up to 1,900 new reported cases a few days ago. Now it's down to 1,400 roughly in the past 24 hours. So there's a great deal of disappointment with the fact that the numbers went from 12 up to now 1,400 a day. And on the economic side as well, people are suffering. People are starting to worry about how they're going to pay their rent. The government have announced that they're going to give grants to all families, regardless of their social status. The government, Netanyahu, is saying this is necessary. He quoted bodies like the World Economic Forum saying that the most important thing is to get this money quickly to the people who need it. And obviously there are others who are saying, no, it should go to those who need it most. Absolutely. And then the government is saying, but that takes time. Yeah,
absolutely. So as you have touched on these points, the nation is in jitters as protests go on for weeks now. And it's not just due to the pandemic, also now the deep economic pain that's being inflicted upon Israelis. What do you think Netanyahu's strategy is now that his ratings have also begun to plummet?
Yes, so he's starting to try to get more of a handle on the situation. We can see that with more frequent appearances on television and announcements, but yet he's having to work with a coalition government with blue and white and the associate Prime Minister Benny Gantz. So everything is taking more time, having to be decided hand in hand. He's now appointed, he's got his big cabinet, but then half of that cabinet is in a coronavirus cabinet. And then they've announced today that there's going to be a smaller committee that's going to be responsible for deciding on these grants that will be handed out, they say, within the next 24, well, not handed out in the next 24 hours, but the decision should be made in the next 24 hours. Right. So, you know, on the health front, on the economic front and the political front, you know, the governments are very busy.
And interestingly, Prime Minister Netanyahu is the first serving Israeli Prime Minister to go on trial on these corruption charges. It was 11 years ago when it was Netanyahu who called for the resignation of the former Prime Minister Olmert to resign over his corruption charges as well. It seems that Bibi has come full circle. What are your comments?
So before the coronavirus, I would say, you know, it depends where you stand on Bibi. If you support him, then you know, people wanted him to carry on serving and would say, as long, you know, go through the trial process, innocent until proven guilty. Those who opposed Bibi obviously, you know, wanted to see him resign. Now the coronavirus has been another factor that nobody expected to appear, and that's definitely affecting his approval ratings. And we'll see now with the second wave that's upon us how his approval ratings and what will be. But in terms of the trial, we heard today that they're going to start hearing from witnesses in January. His Prime Minister Netanyahu's defense had called for a delay until then because from a practical perspective, they were saying it's very difficult to cross-examine witnesses if they themselves had to wear masks and if the witnesses were wearing masks and if the judge is wearing a mask. And we'll see, maybe the masks will still be there in January. But the government is saying that the legal processes and institutions will remain open throughout the coronavirus. Also, the right to protest. The government has been very clear that throughout all of the restrictions in terms of the economy and socializing, the right to protest is to be continued in Israel.
Jody, thank you very much. That's Jody joining us from Israel for the latest there.